You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the Archaeology Show. We've got something a little bit different for you today. On June 1st, I, Chris Webster, recorded with my good friend Brian Woods, otherwise known as Brian the Comic on Facebook. We started a new thing that's a live show, and we call it The Funny Thing About Science. And this first one dealt with archaeology, and I thought it was very relevant to our audience. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying normally on this show, we don't necessarily refrain from profanity on the Archaeology Show, but we don't typically swear when we're talking about archaeology. That being said, this was a 21 and up show, and there's definitely profanity. There's definitely some jokes that are probably a little bit off color. Nothing that's obviously, racist or anything like that. But we don't pull any punches with our comedy because it was a funny show and it's supposed to be that way. And after the first break, where we have an ad for TeePublic, Brian does a short version of his stand-up routine, which if you're easily offended, I'd probably turn it off at that point. So I just wanted to let you guys know that because we didn't censor any of this episode. So again, skip this one. Wait for the next episode if you don't like profanity and things like that. If you don't mind and you want to learn something about archaeology and about what archaeologists do, and how you can be a better steward of the landscape as well, then enjoy this episode. And hopefully the video for this will be out on YouTube at some point at the ArcPodNet YouTube channel. And we're hoping to do these once a month, although that still remains in question. And we'll put the audio up on its own channel at some point, but I thought this was particularly relevant to this audience. So thanks for that. Thanks for listening. And again, if you don't like this sort of thing, then skip this episode and we'll have another great episode for you in 2 weeks. Enjoy.
This network is listener supported. We're trying to move away from paid advertising while also creating new shows and supporting the ones we have. The APN has never and will never make a serious profit on our podcast. Every little dime we make goes back into the network and improving show quality. So become a member today at www.arcpodnet.com/members to show your support, get some extras, and be a benefactor for archaeological education. Members get stickers, a coffee mug, a t-shirt, bonus content, early access to episodes, a private Slack team to talk to other members and the hosts, and full access to training on Team Black over at arccert.black. So check out our memberships at www.arcpodnet.com/members today and support archaeological education. That's www.arcpodnet.com/members. Now back to the show. Well, thanks everyone we kind of switched up our format. We sat and talked about this a lot and so I don't really know how to start. So we're just going to start. So welcome to the first show of The Funny Thing About Science. And I'll be honest, I first came up with this idea because I listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson in Star Talk. And Star Talk is a great podcast, but they focus on astronomy and some other closely related topics. And I was like, talking to Brian, I was like, man, we talk about all kinds of stuff. Let's just have a show, maybe monthly, where we talk about all kinds of different things. Tonight happens to be archaeology because I'm an archaeologist, but it's, we're gonna branch out. So I'll just start and introduce myself real fast. My name is Chris Webster. I'm the founder of the Archaeology Podcast Network. I also run a small archaeology firm here in town doing contract archaeology. I teach podcasting here at the Reno Collective as well. And I do all kinds of things. I was just checking our numbers. We've got like 124,000 monthly subscribers to the APN right here. And you can buy coffee mugs and magnets back there. So
no pressure.
No pressure.
But they're right there.
It helps public education and archaeology, but you can be a bastard and not do it if you want. So anyway, yeah. So that's what we're doing here, and that's why this is all kind of run by the APN because this is the venue with which I'm putting it up on. So let me introduce Brian Woods, who's my co-host for this show. Brian.
Well, hello. So I'm not an archaeologist at all. I'm barely a comedian. It's just that I have a 2.5-year-old and I need reasons to get out of the house, right? So Chris is like, hey, you want to do a show like once a month? And I'm like, yeah, I do. It seemed like that would be easy excuse there. So yeah, basically Chris approached me with the idea and he's like, I want to educate folks. I want to get the news out there, but I'm not funny or entertaining.
It's true.
It's true. I didn't find true, actually. Yeah. But I'm glad because now I have a reason to do stand-up at the end. So
that's right.
Again, if you were coming to this for the intellectual part of it, you're certainly going to get that. But the second part is going to be a little different because that's my time. So I hope you enjoy it regardless.
Right. Rachel, she's my wife and official lovely assistant. Can you tell me when it's 8:45? Yeah, because I just realized I have no way to tell when that is because I'm not going to sit here and look at my watch the whole time. All right, so we're going to get into this. Like I said, we're going to talk about archaeology today, but this is also, we wanted to have it here. I'm a member of the Reno Collective, and so we get to use this space, and we thought, well, I'll tell you the high-level version. We thought, let's have a close, intimate experience with our audience and have interaction, but the real reason it's free. So let's go with that. Yeah.
Well, and that's why there's so much booze. The intimacy part of it.
Yeah. So we're figuring this out, and feel free to talk and interact, and if you have a question or you want to stop us, this isn't like a lecture or anything. We're going to talk about stuff, and we're going to talk about it together. But feel free to just say stuff. I mean, we're hoping to teach you something and also be entertained at the same time. And before I forget, the emergency exit's there, the bathroom's there, so don't get those two mixed up. And let's just get into it. So I guess I'll go.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So I am, like I said, a cultural resource management archaeologist, CRM archaeologist, we call it. Contract archaeology, not academic archaeology. Most of the people know of archaeologists as like stuffy professors, but there's actually 3 archaeologists in this room right now. And we're all contract archaeologists where we do stuff in advance of highways and construction projects and federal projects. The basic definition is anything that requires federal funding or permitting requires cultural assessment ahead of time. So that's what we do. And one of the things that we deal with is, and this is why talking to a general audience of non-archaeologists, that I wanted to bring this up, especially how many people are like from Nevada in here, like born and raised? Okay, so you're all looters, right? So you've all been out in the field and picked something up that looked Native American and said, that's cool, right in the pocket. It's their backyard, right? So that's what we always joke about as archaeologists. So Rachel, my wife, she is a former cultural resource management archaeologist, and Richie back there, he's also a CRM archaeologist, and it's also his birthday today. So, that's one of the first things I wanted to bring up was we always talk to the public, all the archaeologists out there, we all just like get mad and get drunk at bars and say, damn the public and their looting and their thievery, but they don't really understand the laws and the reasons behind why we do that. So that's one of the first things I wanted to talk about was educating everybody on, why we leave things in place, especially in the era of smartphones. Everybody's got a high quality camera in their pocket, take a picture of it, snap it, and leave it down on the ground. The primary reason is it's not yours, and it's actually illegal. So, $50,000 fine and jail time if you're caught with something on BLM land. If it's on your own land, you can loot to your heart's content, but it's still kind of wrong. But I don't know. Brian, you've been in Nevada a long time. How much have you looted?
Well, first, I just want to ask: is anyone actually concerned about this? Is anyone concerned about this $50,000 fine if someone pops up out of a bush and is like, "Give me that fucking arrowhead"? Like when is that going to happen?
It's like Ranger Dave.
That's not going to happen. So a lot is the answer. A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's no way I'm hiking and I see a super cool arrowhead or edge, and I'm not taking a no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So convince me.
Has anybody actually picked something up? I mean, I'm not like gonna. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I probably would have done it had I been born and raised in Nevada. I wasn't. I was born in the Seattle area, and it's all just like forests and everything's covered anyway. So I didn't have a chance to do it. Yeah, but so yeah. I mean, the biggest reason, just to get serious for a second, is it's someone else's heritage. That's the number one reason we say it's someone else's heritage. A lot of I'm not a spiritual person. I know Brian's not. That being said, people are, and a lot of Native Americans are, a lot of Native American groups, and a lot of times it's their stuff. But it doesn't just limit it to Native Americans. We also record a lot of things from the early 1900s and late 1800s that's related to early mining. And the weird thing is, we go out and do these like trash cleanups, and people say, "Oh, let's pick up all this trash." But honestly, that's just ruining our jobs for 50 years from now when we have to record it and we can't tell what happened. So archaeologists are like the only ones that kind of promote looting or littering and non-trash cleanup because it's kind of job security for us. But because a lot of what we record, Richie's been out on a project in the last few weeks, a lot of what we record is people's old trash. And with Native Americans, I mean, they don't like you to say it, but it's also their trash. It's sacred object that's also trash because they left it there. It's junk that they didn't need anymore, or they lost, or something, and it's literally garbage. But now it has a sacred meaning because time has passed. It's their ancestors that did that, and that's what they impart on that. If we imparted that sort of sacred meaning to all of our ancestors' old tin cans and glass bottles, my God, the world would be a dirty place.
So what you're saying is that when we're all gone and, we ourselves are fossils, if you will, like someone's going to dig up a bunch of K-cups and just be like, oh my God, look at this. We got to, don't pick that up. Don't take it home and put it on your mantle. That's $50,000 for that K-cup because those people are super dead.
I mean, that's the only way we're going to be able to define the Keurig layer of occupation for humanity, We have the Anthropocene now, which they're talking about as the humans' impact on geology. And they say it starts, I think, somewhere around the industrial era, the industrial age, early 1900s kind of thing. But for archaeologists, I mean, when we do carbon dating for anything, the carbon dating is not actually from now. It's not from current. When you hear before present is the 1950s. I think it's 1950, actually. Because that's when all the nuclear testing was at its height. And that's when the carbon signature of the planet, the entire planet, was changed. So when we do carbon dating, it's from 1950 as a baseline on back. And as we go forward in time, that's going to have to be factored into carbon dating. My only point with that is we've affected the environment to a point where, we have a human-related effect on something that we can see in the planet. And the K-cup layer is real. It's a real thing. So... And we keep cleaning everything up. I was just talking about this on another podcast. We record roads all the time. And one of the only ways we can identify when a road was used, Rachel and I recorded a road, an old immigration road a year ago. And one of the only ways we can really date that is by digging the stuff up or finding the stuff on the side of the road and then looking at that and analyzing that and say, oh, well, this was used from the 1860s on through, we've got 1950s car parts as well. So we can't say exactly what year it was used, but we know it was used in this range. And that's only because of trash. It's only because of trash. So you're actually doing the future historians a service when you throw your Burger King wrapper out the window. I'm just saying. No?
Well, I don't know. I was going to make a joke about porn magazines, but no one has those. So I'm like, leave those around so they have something to look at when they find it.
I know.
Right? But they won't be able to get the pages apart.
Yeah.
Because it's squished, not because of what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Y'all are nasty. We haven't even got to that part of the show. So.
Yeah. Well, so that was my kind of diatribe on looting and why you should leave stuff in place. I don't know if you buy it at all, but I would say the best thing. The other thing, I guess I did have one more thing on that. So the one thing is sacred heritage. The archaeology means something to someone. Just because it doesn't mean anything to you and it looks like a cool shiny object is beside the point. It means something to someone, and you don't know who that person is, and that fact shouldn't matter. The other thing is archaeologists. Again, I'm not talking just about job security for Richie back here, but I mean, we've gone out to a number of sites that we've recorded, and the shiny objects, the arrowhead, we call them projectile points because it's not always arrows that they're on the top of. Sometimes it's spears, sometimes it's darts, so collectively we call them projectile points. That is the cool thing on the site, right? But the cool thing about that cool thing on the site is that it's datable. When we look at the base of that thing and the shape of it, that's called morphology, we can tell not only probably who did it because of where it's at, but when it dates to, because these things, as technology does, it's like dating iPhones. If any one of you here pulled out an old small iPhone with a 30-pin connector on it, I know exactly what iPhone that is. It's the same thing. So if I look at an arrowhead and I see this shape of a base on it, I know that it dates to 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, roughly, because that's how long that technology was in prevalence in this part of the country. But if you take that off the site, and all that's left is what we call debitage, or the flakes that were resulted from making that. So you maybe have a habitation site and you've got all these flakes lying around and all these different things. And people come in, it's often hunters, ranchers, hikers, whoever. They'll come in and pull that stuff off the ground, the cool stuff, and leave the other stuff. We've recorded tons of sites where there's thousands of these flakes, but none of the what we call diagnostics. So if there's none of the diagnostics, then we basically report back on our site record that we write to the state that there's 10,000 flakes here. There's no diagnostics. The data potential for this site has been exhausted. Therefore, it's not potentially eligible for listing as a site on the National Register of Historic Places, which means, in simple terms, bring in the bulldozers. So if you leave the good stuff in place, an archaeologist can hopefully find that, not somebody else, and then make a determination that, okay, now we know that this dates to 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. We don't have very many sites of that age in this area, which means this is potentially eligible or significant, and we need to take this to the next level, which means possibly excavation, or maybe even, in the perfect world, avoidance. So the mine that's coming through there, or the highway that's coming through there, the pipeline, they'll simply move it because it's Nevada and there's tons of space. So they don't need to go in and dig it up. They don't need to go in and do that stuff. They'll just move it. If it's an open pit mine, we'll come in and dig it up. But we'll do it scientifically and learn as much as we can, and then put that stuff, it belongs in a museum, right? So we'll put that stuff somewhere where it can be preserved, and then and learn from. So we can't learn a lot from it when it's sitting on your mantle, if anybody has mantles anymore.
All right, so fine, I have a solution. Okay, I find it, I bring it to you, you study it, and you go, man, this is super old. And I'm like, I know, that's why I picked it up, and I'm taking it home. You get the data you need, I get my shiny thing, we're all good.
If that system existed, I'd be all for it. Because the Nevada State Museum doesn't want any more artifacts. There's what we call a curation problem in this state, in this country. There's no space left.
I feel like you're arguing against your point.
I know, I am a little bit.
Like, I would be doing you a favor now by taking that stuff.
That's what I'm saying. I said I would be all for it. So if we could do that, I would absolutely be all for it. So it's because the museums, they just simply don't want it. The state repositories, they don't want them. I mean, sure, they want them, but they can't have them because nobody's going to pay to keep it. And honestly, the Native American groups, it's difficult to tell which one to give it to in a lot of cases, because there could be like 12 or 13 that have overlapping territories for that time period. I don't want to be, I'm not trying to be insensitive to anybody here, but they all say that, they sprouted out of the ground right there at that point in time, at the beginning of time, whatever their construct of the beginning of time is. It's hard to kind of disagree with that, when they're sitting there saying this is the case. But when you have overlapping territories that say that, then it's like, who do we contact and say this belongs to you? Go take care of it. Even, has anybody heard of Kennewick Man? It was a really old, I think it was dated to like 9,000 years, fossil. I don't know if he's fossilized, actually. I don't think he was fossilized. He wasn't fossilized, yeah. But an old skeleton found up in Kennewick, Washington, down near the southeastern border of Washington and Oregon, eroding out of the Columbia River. And it was found by somebody we know, actually, a long time ago, back in the 90s. And he immediately took it to his lab. He didn't know what it was. The police thought it could be somebody from like a week ago. And so he takes it to his lab and says, no, this is much older. Drills into it, sends some samples off, and has some things done. And then all hell breaks loose when they find out it's 9,000 years old. Because now every single Native American group in that area is going like, that's our ancestor, we want him back. And now it's like, what do you do? What do you do with him? So I don't even know where I was going with that.
Like, can you describe what he was wearing if you're trying to claim him?
I know, right?
Yeah, like in a lost and found or whatever. Like, you need to be able to prove somehow what was he wearing at the time.
Yeah, do any photographs? Do any family? Yeah,
So
I know.
So since we seem to kind of reach, like, how full of shit is Indiana Jones?
Indiana Jones is 100% full of shit. So
Sorry,
I know.
I just wanted to start that there.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have, as archaeologists, we don't have a Neil deGrasse Tyson. We don't have a Bill Nye. We don't have a name your famous scientist. We don't have an Einstein. We have Indiana fucking Jones. So, and that's terrible because Indiana Jones, we don't all carry guns and whips, at least not all the time.
Be dope, though.
I know, right? And I mean, if you're working in Alaska, I think you need to carry a gun, but that's because of bears, not natives. So, Nazis. But yeah, Indiana Jones, he's supposedly a professor, obviously, and just goes around the world collecting rare antiquities and putting them in a museum. He says it belongs in a museum, but the current thinking of archaeologists is it belongs with the people who own it. That's where it really belongs. We want to study it and learn from it, but Indiana Jones is totally full of shit, and Lara Croft is also full of shit. So I don't know what you think about that. Did I destroy your entire childhood?
Well, I mean, not the important parts. No, no, it's well preserved. There's no problem there. But she was like a treasure hunter, right? So she didn't claim. But everyone thinks of Indiana Jones. That's the first thing I think of.
Sure.
And well, at least the first 3 movies. I heard that the rest were horrible. I don't.
Everybody always says that.
But yeah, that's what you always think of, right? That's what archaeologists do. And then you meet them, and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go do a parking lot."
Right.
So are there Indiana Jones like schema archaeologists out there? Like, what is there something famous that we would know about or that's cool?
You mean like for people or sites?
Both.
Well, for people, let me start with that one. So
Is there like a rock star archaeologist?
There are periods of time where there are rock star archaeologists, but not for any reason somebody like would know Neil deGrasse Tyson. Does everybody in here know who Neil deGrasse Tyson is? Right. But none of you are astrophysicists, because I'm not. So, but we all know who he is. And nobody, I think, in archaeology, with the possible exception, I hate to say it, but maybe you guys know, Margaret Mead or something like that, famous anthropologist. Jane Goodall, she's not an archaeologist. She's not really even an anthropologist. She's more of a primatologist. But either way, those sorts of names, those people, and really because they got out of their field, they got out of their lab and decided to speak publicly about it, what they were doing. So, and they wrote books and things like that were written for popular audience. Whereas most archaeologists, they just don't do that, So there have been people through time that have gained a little bit of notoriety for who they are and what they study. But the reality is we just don't have that kind of spokesperson. And that spokesperson is still Indiana Jones. But I'll be honest, as much damage as he's done for the impression of what we do in our field, most of the people of my age, I'm 43, I made out during like the second movie because that was terrible anyway, with like, when I was 12 or whatever it was, at the Dollar Theater. But, so I grew up with those movies, and they were probably really formative in me becoming an archaeologist later on. They really made me think about stuff like that. So no, the Indiana Jones character was built on lots and lots and lots of different people. Some were archaeologists and some were not. Some were just people. What was it? Spielberg, Lucas, and the other guy that nobody ever can remember. They were all sitting around. There's audio that surfaced not too long ago. On the Archaeology Podcast Network, we interviewed a guy that wrote Indiana Jones in History. It's a new book that came out just within the last year. And he talks about the idea of Indiana Jones and how he was doing his work and how he was getting to these countries and what their antiquities laws are for different areas throughout the world. And would that have actually worked at any time period? And the answer is yes, kind of, but probably not. And he goes also through this video that he studied pretty intensely, or this audio, or whatever it was, and how these guys are talking about creating the Indiana Jones characters. So no, it wasn't based on anybody in particular. There is no, people have tried to say, well, this person was the real Indiana Jones. This person was, Indiana Jones is based on them, but that's actually not true. Nobody's based on Indiana Jones. And the reason is because that character would not have an academic career if he was actually real. So, he would not have made it to his ripe old age and to be Indiana Jones.
Especially not now with like social media and everything.
I know, right?
You get called out like immediately. So
freaking looters. I know we have no remorse, or what should I say, empathy towards people that are doing that these days. You guys hear about the old lady in Australia who was, I swear to God, she was like in her 80s or something, or maybe even older, and she was a wife of whatever.
You are not in your 80s. Right? If you are, good for you.
Right?
Holy cow.
Have another glass of wine. Yeah, I know. No, feel free to stand up and go get more drinks, please, because otherwise we got to bring all this home.
Yeah, darn.
I didn't say wine. I said have cookies. Have cookies. Anyway, this woman, it was just less than a year ago. She was a wife of an ambassador, and the guy, she was Australian. She was wife of, I think it was an ambassador or some kind of dignitary like that. And they would go to these places in like Africa and India over the course of, say, 40 years. And she basically just went around and picked shit up. Like, she would just collect stuff, like artifacts, because they didn't have solid antiquities laws to prevent her from doing that. So she would go around to these sites as an interest as she traveled around with her husband and pick all these things up. And honestly, it was an educational thing. She didn't think she was doing it out of malice. She just didn't have any idea. She didn't know she was doing anything wrong. Just like when most of you go out tomorrow and pick up an arrowhead, or let's say last week, because tomorrow you'll know that you'll have that guilty conscience. But last week, when you picked it up, you didn't think you were doing anything wrong. It's just something cool on the ground, and it's been left there, so why not pick it up? Well, she thought the same thing. Well, now she's in jail. And they just threw the book at her because she was promoting her stuff. She put pictures or something, somebody did, of her stuff online, and social media tore her a new one. And they're like, I don't care how old you are, you're a looter and you're going to prison. So, and she had to return a lot of the stuff too. A lot of stuff would return to the countries it came from. And last I heard, they sent her to jail. So
I think if you are an antiquity, you should be able to pick up any antiquity that you want, right? Like, you've made it. And honestly, who cares if she goes to jail? I'd be like, fucking, let's go to jail. I'm 80.
I know. Yeah,
who
right?
cares? I'm done.
Yeah.
Well, maybe she wasn't. You cannot be 80. You cannot take this. If you're going to get offended about this now, I hate to tell you what's coming. Okay? It's not ageist jokes, but I'm just saying, this is very surface level stuff here. So I'm not saying that I totally did this, but when I was in Turkey in the Air Force and I went out hiking and I literally found Roman coins in the dirt.
Turkey is known as the largest open-air museum in the world.
And some of those made it home in my boots. Again, this didn't happen, but how big of a deal would that be if anyone cared at all?
Well, you have two problems. One, you were in the military when you did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I knew it was wrong, too. They straight told me. And I was like,
right.
All right, cool.
So the fact that you were in the military, that's like, instant Leavenworth sentence right there, probably. Mm-hmm. But Turkey also has now, and as of the last, because I actually read this, and after interviewing the author of that Indiana Jones book, he talked about Turkey quite extensively. Because Turkey, like I said, known as the world's largest open-air museum. There's stuff everywhere, and you can just walk out and just pick things up, and it's not that big a deal. Well, it is a big deal, because now they have pretty strong antiquities laws, and they're protecting everything that they have. So, it would be... you heard of Turkish prisons, right? So if they got you back there, you'd probably be in one. It's pretty big deal.
Did you know that Turkish prisons, at least the ones outside of Incirlik Air Force Base, have like a brothel in it? No, seriously, like, this is not meant to be funny, but women can actually like pay off their husband's debt and get them out of jail. So I don't know if you're really making that strong of an argument there either.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that at all because this is... Yeah, how am I going to get out? We've discussed this.
Yeah.
So there's laws, and there's culture.
Sure.
And there's legal and cultural aspects on this. So say you're a Sunni in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
You're picking up those artifacts off the ground and using them, taking them home. Those are your people's artifacts. You're
right.
Wandering through the desert and gathering. What's their legal and moral cultural situation?
Right. Well, I can't speak for Turkey, but that actually has happened here. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll bring it down to real world. We were both on a project. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Ruby pipeline, but it's a huge natural gas pipeline that goes from Wyoming across the top of Utah there all the way across Nevada. Although, strangely, because of California laws, it like gets to California, makes a 90-degree turn and goes to Oregon before it hits California and then goes across. Yeah, so that's pretty funny. But we had on that project sometimes we had Native American monitors. So Native American tribes were identified, to be part of that area wherever we were at, and the monitors were basically Native Americans that were part of that tribe, and they were given kind of a rudimentary training in their own history and what they knew, and they were given some sort of official training from the tribe, but it never was very extensive. And some of them, I don't want to say some, I want to say one guy in particular that we worked with, he just did not want us out there, didn't want to work with us. I don't know if he just hated the job. It was pretty easy for him. He didn't have to do anything. He just had to walk with us and just like be there, right? So... But they were there just because it made them feel comfortable, to know that we weren't pocketing things, to know that we weren't, doing stuff that they didn't appreciate. But he would actually pick things up so we couldn't find them, because he said, this is my ancestors. And at one point we found a quarry, like an ancient quarry. So a rock source where they would go and quarry out material, and they would often do like initial prep of artifacts, called like a biface, where they would take some flakes off, but they would make the full shape. They'd make like this ovular shape. Then they'd travel with that, and then when they needed something, it was halfway there, and they could just finish it off, and they could make whatever they want. Well, that's what quarries were usually for. And So we're there, and the process of making. Who knows what the process of making stone tools is called? Who knows that word? Not you two. Who knows? Flint knapping. It's called flint knapping. Has nothing to do with flint. It comes from England. They made up the term because they have a lot of flint over there. Flint is the stuff that also makes the sparks to like flintlock rifles and stuff. But flint knapping, and I don't know what the origins of the word knapping are, but it's the process of using something to bash off the other stone to make the stone tools to take the flakes off. Yeah, Knapping. Thanks. But anyway, he's sitting there on this quarry that we're trying to record. We're trying to record like where the densities are and where the stuff is, and he's just sitting there flint knapping. And he's like, and we're like, what are you doing? Could you at least go off the site and do that? And he's like, well, this is my ancestor's site, so I'm just adding to it. How is this any different? And I honestly didn't know what to say to that. I mean, I didn't know how to respond except just to be the official person because I was the crew chief, and I was like, I don't know. We're trying to preserve this as we found it. That's the best I could give him. Like, we're preserving this as we found it, not through time. Because he's right, actually, that other people, other Native American groups, hell, other hunters and ranchers have probably come through. There are people like coming through to these source material sites and getting their own source material to do stuff with, or doing stuff out there. So there's nothing saying that what we were recording had any age to it whatsoever. It could have been made 2 weeks ago for all we know. There's very few ways to actually date that kind of stuff if you don't have any diagnostic ends on them. So I don't know. It was weird. So I don't know how to even answer that question. It depends on your cultural ideals of what you think about that culture and the past. A lot of Native American groups, they won't touch anything that they think is from their ancestors. They think it's bad. It's bad spiritually. If they had like a karma belief or something like that, it's bad for them if they mess with, touch, or alter anything from their ancestors. And they just assume that everything is their ancestors, typically, just like across the board, because it's easier that way. They're not like, oh, I don't know if we made that projectile point 2,000 years ago, but if it's there, if it's on their territory, they're like, yeah, that's our ancestors, and we're not touching it. So, right, yeah, I didn't make it, therefore, ... ancestor. So
like, for Caucasian people in general, we can't go dig anywhere. Like, we can't actually prove where we don't have, like, I'm literally Heinz 57. I'm allowed to take a tiny piece of this thing in this country and a tiny piece from that country over there.
Right.
So yeah, we can't.
No.
Do that.
Germany. That's all you got. Yeah. Europe. All of Europe. That's all you've got. Yeah. So anyway. We were going to talk a little bit about the, does anybody, like I said, this is interactive. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions based on anything we've said so far? You're all looters, by the way.
You said that you can't necessarily pick up things, blah, 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 but when you do, the museums are full, so then they don't want them, and maybe the ancestors don't know if it came from them, so where does it go? Like, what's the real issue with
Yeah.
a random person discovering something?
That's a really good question.
Yes, but
Yeah.
what,
That's a really good question. The whole messed up thing about this whole entire equation is when we record stuff as archaeologists, we also don't pick it up. We leave it there. So when we dig, however, when we remove it from its context and we excavate and we have to pull the soil matrix out that the thing is around, then we do collect it. That goes to a museum. But if it's unless it's like really special, there's a thing called a Clovis point that everybody kind of there's like that's the be all end all to projectile points because they're very rare. If you find one of those, the BLM generally says collect it, and it's also a site where that was located. But the answer is it's really hard for me to tell you not to pick everything up and to leave it on the ground because two things: one, somebody's probably going to come along right behind you and pick it up and put it in their pocket. And you're pretty confident of that, so you're probably going to pick it up to prevent them from doing it, right? We've heard that lots of times.
I don't want to get into the wrong
Right.
hands, right?
No, you don't want it to go for nefarious
Look what happens
purposes.
with the Ark of the Covenant.
I know, right? You never know when a Nazi's going to pick it up and then just like unleash hell, right?
It better be me than them.
But then that's the rub. What we hope is that the next person along to find that is an archaeologist, and the only good thing about that is the archaeologist will record all the information they can about that. They'll take measurements, they'll take photographs, and we will record that location and all the data that we recorded with it with the state. And that's where the real value comes in for us. We say we want to do these analyses where over here there's a point, over here there's two flakes, over here there's another point, and individually they mean nothing. But when we do this massive analysis on the entire landscape, and we say, oh, well, we can clearly see that they were moving from here to here to here to here, and they were staying along these edges. And then when we pull back out a little farther, and we realize that because you guys left the points there, we know that it dates to 7,000 to 9,000 years ago, let's say as an example. And a lot of places in Nevada, 7,000 to 9,000 years ago, massive lakes because all the glaciers were melting. So the huge lake that was covering all of this was Lake Lahontan. And as that drained out, you were left with other lakes. There still is a Lake Lahontan. It's down by, what is that, Silver Springs or whatever that is, down by Dayton, east of there. But also Pyramid Lake, Washoe Lake down there by south of Carson, and a bunch of other small lakes. That one near Walker Lake near Hawthorne, that was also part of Lake Lahontan. All of that was part of Lake Lahontan, but as that started to drain, they became bigger lakes. So you can see the time periods as people march down the slopes, and you're like, what the hell are people doing way up here in the mountains? Well, it's because the rest of it was a lake. It's not now, but it was back then. So when we start looking at these analyses of these sites and their locations, and we can date these, and then we can look at those dates and look at their elevations and look at where they are, we can start mapping out the locations of these things as they change through time. So the short answer to your question is, if you leave it in place, and hopefully that 1 in a million chance that somebody comes along that can actually record it and give that information to the state, somebody can come along later on and make bigger, wider generalizations about the cultural history of the area.
Can't you do it like the movies where you just call it?
Yes. Yes, and a lot of people will call because how many people in here, this is the first time you've ever heard of contract archaeology? Probably everyone, right? So everybody calls a professor at a museum, at a university or something. Probably because we're not listed in like the yellow pages, if anybody still has a phone book. But you can find me on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're there, but anyway, yeah, it's really difficult. There's no like hotline to call to say. One of the things that England has, which is one thing I've wanted to, it's on my long list of things that I want to develop at some point because simply nobody's doing it. They have something called a portable antiquities scheme, because everything that's under the ground in England, in the UK, is owned by the Crown. Flat out. They just said, I don't care who you are. If it's subsurface, it's owned by the Crown right off the bat. Now, a lot of times, if you can prove, it's a very thin veiled, a thin layer of proof to say that, no, that's actually mine, or that's this, or whatever. Then they're like, okay. But just like as a matter of law, everything below the ground is owned by the Crown. But there's a huge metal detector community there too. So there's people out there, because like Brian here, he just found them on the surface, but the metal detectors there, they find Roman coins like everywhere because the Romans occupied the UK for a really long time.
Or like weapons caches. And
weapons, yeah.
Like
the
really
Iron
cool
Age
stuff.
yeah. So you find all kinds of things, and people are finding them. So for England, their way of handling that was to create this database where you can download like a smartphone app now, take a picture of it, takes your location, it's all anonymous. Now the state basically has the information. They know where it was. They have pictures of it. Nobody's described it, so they can describe it from a picture. And now you at least have the data for where the thing was collected. And we don't have anything like that in this country. And the problem with this country in doing something like that, it would have to be state by state. And not only that, but agency by agency, because the BLM would have to approve stuff on BLM land. The state would have to approve stuff on state land. I think like 1% of Nevada is state land. And then the Forest Service would have to approve stuff on their land. And it's just a whole nasty mess. And then private land is right out. Like you can do whatever you want on private land. You could, dig up an Indian burial ground and set them up as little marionettes if you want. I mean, nobody cares. It'd be a horrible thing to do, but
somebody cares. I'm pretty sure somebody's going to care.
Somebody cares, but there's no legal recourse for it.
Yeah. What are you going to do? He likes mummies. So, question. When a group of dead people are designated as special and they have their trash laying around, as you described it, and you're not allowed to dig it up once it's found, right? So pretend there's some version of humanity still left in 200 years, 300 years from now on Earth.
Right.
It's not going to happen. But say it does. We've got all these major cities, and we will now be the K-cup layer. So are we just nonstop losing Earth mass to, like, we just are going to have no way to disturb any ground ever eventually, because anywhere that a human has occupied and then died and become special because they're dead.
Right.
Now you can't, like all of New York City you can't do anything with it in the future.
we're just in a really special place in time, I think, technologically and culturally, because because the Industrial Revolution and then the technological revolution happened so fast as compared to every other time period in history. We've not even been able to cope with where we are now versus where we were even 100 years ago when she was born, apparently. So,
You brought this on yourself. I mean, honestly.
I mean, what was it like in 1930 when you were a teenager? No, so they had, but in 200 or 300 years, my hope is that we've had time to come to grips with that, because the only thing that makes something sacred or worth preserving is the people that think it's sacred or worth preserving. That's it. As soon as those people are gone, and that happens, now
We tried to accelerate that process as a country, by the way.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Well, like, for example, I belong to a group almost just to be an outside person looking in, but I'm an archaeologist, so they think I'm one of them. It's called Mid-Century Modern Reno. And there's this entire group trying to preserve have you all seen we live downtown. Have you ever seen the shit motels downtown that are just weekly, meth dens? I mean, that's all they are. They're knocking some of them down, but this group is trying to prevent that because they want to repurpose them or revitalize them.
Reno history.
Or do something. Yeah. But I tried to tell one of the organizers, who's a friend of mine, I tried to tell her as gently as possible because she's so passionate about the mid-century modern thing. Because just a brief history, Reno, was basically a Western, gunslinger town for a really long time. And then all of a sudden, post-World War II, like a lot of places, these like 50 to 100 hotels popped up because it was a crossroads of a bunch of different places. It was one of the biggest areas Reno was that was not coastal, which is a weird thing, with the mid-century modern style hotel. And they were just everywhere. And now these people want to preserve them. But I'm like, okay, well, in the 50s, when these motels were going up, they were destroying Victorian houses and things of that era. And there was probably your group, your ancestors, your group was there saying, we don't want all this modern architecture. We want to preserve all these other things in place. And then when those were being erected, they were tearing down all the Western stuff that was from the late 1800s. And there was a preservation group then going, but this is our history. Reno is from, the 1960s or 1860s, and we got to preserve these things. Otherwise, we'll lose our past. And then, obviously, when they came in the 1860s and built up Reno, the Native Americans were like, what the fuck? We were here, and now we're not. Why don't we preserve this? And it just goes back and back and back. So we'll get to a point in the future when nobody gives a shit about us right now, and we'll just be able to move on. Right, I mean, I don't either, but somebody does. So, yeah.
I never even realized how entirely insulting that. Wow.
So we carry that back further
Mm-hmm.
to some of the things you're looking at.
Sure.
And those shit yurts and tippies and shelters,
Yeah.
they didn't know how to tan the hides yet. But there's a little bit of them left. Why are we producing? Why preserve that?
Right. I mean, so the Native...
I'm playing devil's advocate here.
No, you're totally right.
Preserve anything like that that's,
Like I said, as long as somebody's passionate about it, there's going to be preservation issues. I mean, the Washoe Paiute that were here when they started building up Reno, when the people with all their gold and silver money, probably silver money around here, in that time frame, when they were building up Reno and putting up their mansions that we're still preserving, when they were putting all that stuff and they displaced the Paiute who had been here for years, there was a company we all worked for in the past, and Richie works for them now, that did the retract project, and that was sinking the train tracks through Reno. There's a book written about that. Tons and tons and tons of Native American history right along the river. Go figure. They were right along the river. So, but guess what? Those Native Americans that were displaced to build Reno, they displaced other Native Americans, and they displaced other Native Americans, and they back 9,000 to 14,000 years as far as we have history for. So it's an ongoing saga of displacement, and as long as somebody's around to remember the people that were displaced, then they'll be preserved. But once they're gone, it's out the door. That's why I think archaeology is so important, because we take this stuff dispassionately, record what we see, write down. I mean, when I describe an artifact, I don't say, oh, this is a beautiful piece of obsidian. I say, no, this is black banded, semi-translucent obsidian. It looks like this. Here's 15 pictures of it. It measures this. I'm done. Okay. You can make interpretations on it later. But that description of that artifact and those pictures of that artifact will hopefully remain for centuries to come, and somebody can learn from that later on. So that's why I think archaeology is ultimately so important, as compared to, say, history books are important, but there's a lot of bias and conjecture in those as well. So
what you're saying is that in like 50 to 100 years, we're going to be arguing over like a dispensary.
yes.
Like, no, weed was so important to Reno during these years. We absolutely, I mean, look at the education system went from 50 to 48. It was amazing.
There's going to be entire theoretical schools of thought on why the weed layer was surpassed the K-cup layer. Like K-cup, weed. Like iPhone, K-cup, weed. That's how it's going to go. And
It's
we're
just
like,
going to be
what
bloom
happened?
bags everywhere,
Bloom
right?
bags.
Just all over.
I know. Well, and there's a book that you should check out, although it's pretty old and it's not very well written, but the concept is pretty neat. It's called the Nasarema, which is American spelled backwards. And it's a way far advanced society. I don't even know if it's humans. I can't even remember. This book was written a long time ago, and I read it in college. But it was basically describing. And there's another book too. I can't remember what the name of it was. Hotel of Mysteries. Yeah, Motel of Mysteries. Same thing. It's basically, and there's the Motel of Mysteries has good pictures, and there's like a plunger or so like a toilet plunger and things like that. And they're like trying to describe from an outsider's perspective that had never seen any of these things, what these things were used for. You know, what could this possibly have been? Some sort of early communication device or, you know, some sort of thing. And like, what could these possibly be? You know, as an example, I was in the Navy. Brian was in the Air Force. And when I was working on my, on our jets, we had a thing called a sound-powered phone. And there was so you could plug in to this. No, that wasn't the sound-powered phone. Anyway, it was a communication device for the pilots. So you could be down at the end of the airplane, at the bottom of the airplane when it's running and the cockpit's closed because they can't have it open when the engines are on because they'll get sucked in. And so you plug in so you can talk to the pilots while they're getting ready to go. Well, the pilots have in front of them, I mean, it's a piss tube. Let's just call it that. It's just like this long conical device that the pilot, you know, pees into. Well, it looks like kind of a megaphone. And we would tell when we were doing engine run-up tests and we'd have some young airman in there or something like that, not a pilot, and they're just sitting in the passenger seat. We're like, we'd be down there with the headset going, I can't hear you. Use the sound-powered phone. And they're just like all over that piss tube with their mouth because they didn't know what it was. And they're just like yelling into this piss tube, and we didn't clean those, you know.
Someone needs to do some PM on that. The thing's nasty.
Oh, my God. Yeah. So that's the point. What we think is important is not going to be important in 40 years unless somebody keeps that dream alive, you know, unless somebody records it or somebody, you know, writes about it or makes a movie about it or whatever, you know. I mean, her entire childhood is gone. So it's just.
So you're saying it is going to happen because like people super love their weed.
True.
And the very first dispensary is probably going to have a historical preservation society. I mean, I hope. Really.
I mean, honestly, dispensaries, I mean, I'm not a weed smoker, but as an archaeologist, dispensaries, I mean, the legalization of that is a turning point in history. But all laws that are massively impactful on society are. So realistically, our metric is 50 years too. If something's at least 50 years old, we have to evaluate it for recording, and we just call it inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places. Not everything gets listed, but we evaluate it for inclusion on in case it's going to get listed. That's our metric. But that doesn't mean it has to be 50 years old. So, like, for example, the 9/11 site is on the National Register of Historic Places because one of the criteria is a significant event, and that was a significant event that impacted the entire planet. Well, at least our country. And so the first dispensary in a state, I mean, while it sounds kind of like a joke, should actually be kind of a historic place, you know?
It is, like you said, it is marking a very specific change of thought.
Yeah.
In a huge group of people all at once, where something was super horrible one day and the next day it was fine. And you could tell that by just speaking to people. Oh, you can't employ anyone. They're all drug addicts and weed. And this is the, devil lettuce. And what? Oh, it's legal? Oh shit. What's up? Let's go get some, right? People switch like that, which is horrible. Like, you shouldn't be able to send people to prison over something you could just change your mind about and then, oh, my bad, never mind.
This is next month's topic.
Yes.
Yeah. No. But you're right. The thing that makes it an important event is not just for people who smoke weed that can now do it legally, and wherever they want, they can just go buy it. It impacts everyone. I mean, it actually impacts, even if you don't smoke, it does impact you in a way that, maybe this was some kind of hidden thing that, people only did behind closed doors because it was illegal. But now it's out there now. So it is actually affecting everyone. It's like cigarettes. I'm not a smoker, but cigarettes affect me. Every time I walk into the Silver Legacy, I understand cigarettes exist. It's so disgusting. Just walking in the El Dorado. I mean, you can't get the smoke smell out of those places anymore. Even if they banned smoking, you'd have to replace all the carpet in the walls. But so it affects you. And if we had a big turning point like that, where cigarettes were illegal and then they became legal, but that's never really happened because they've always kind of been legal from one way or another. But that being said, like prohibition, we all know about prohibition. We might not know the details, but they made alcohol illegal, and then
this is going to be this steady running joke. I hope you come. If we keep doing this, you need to come to every single one of these so we could just have that joke.
That's right. You can drink. It's okay. Yeah. It's no. So
we'll get permission from your doctor to make sure that you're.
But that's a significant event, and if we could tie prohibition to a place, that's what archaeology needs. If we could tie that to a place, I don't know if the law was probably signed on the president's desk, which is already historic, so that's not a thing. But like where other treaties have been signed and things like that, like ships and buildings and things like the Appomattox Courthouse, I think is where the Civil War was declared, where they gave up or something. That's a historic place. I think it's a national park even, because that event was significant to our history. So that's the metric.
Reno Collective.
The Reno Collective is significant to this event right now, and you're all part of it.
When we become famous,
that's
they're
right.
Gonna be like, oh shit,
this is where it all started.
Invented this whole new thing that people were already doing.
They just did it poorly.
Did it live and awkwardly.
So, well, I think we're running up close to our time. From what I can tell, is there any comments? I want some brutal comments too. We want to do this monthly, and we're not just going to talk about archaeology every time. We've got some other stuff that we just want to sit up here and BS about, and maybe have the audience interact. Any thoughts? Any thoughts on what we've done, or questions, or anything like that? Nobody's walked out yet.
That was really good. I think you should have more time for questions.
Sure.
Or like ask after certain comments and
Yeah.
whatnot. So you have the.
We're just nervously talking at this point, so yeah.
I had like questions lined up in my head, and I forgot a couple of them because of it. But
That's why we kept talking, so we didn't have to answer your question. So yeah,
figured.
yeah.
Well, when you don't know the answer.
You should promote it more. Like,
Yes.
no idea.
I know.
They're all like, she's
Well, I think we were.
happy on it, but
I think we were secretly hoping that no one would show up, but
Kind of.
yeah. I know that's actually what we said when we were setting this up. We was like, worst case scenario, we just take home a whole bunch of beer and wine. Like that's the worst case scenario right here. So
Like we would, if no one showed up, we would have done this, but like just there,
right.
and then just drank.
Yeah,
So-
and honestly too, we'd gone back and forth on ticket prices. We'd thought about having an actual show, and yeah, I'm sure it's great. Yeah, we were actually going to do free for this first one, but one of the managers here said, since this is such a small venue, that when things are priced at free, people tend to not give it very much importance. So if they're going to skip it, then they'll just skip it. So we could have 20 tickets sold and 3 people show up because they were, well, not sold, but given away, because this room only holds so many people. So that's why we ended up, well, let's just make it $5. We're not going to make any money because we probably spent, $50 on snacks and alcohol. So, or more. I think we spent probably $100, but
I spent $100, but like I was gonna spend it anyways. So like,
I know, right?
Honestly, what's the
Yeah.
difference?
So we're looking at, we want to keep it here for the first few months as we get it going, and as this, if we start filling the room up, bring more chairs in and fill it. This room will hold, I think, 25 by fire code safety reasons. If that happens, then first off, we'll start live streaming it, and then also, we'll just keep, we'll find another venue. We want to do it in different places.
an interactive showman.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff you can find. And
Exactly.
So what if so say the idea is we did this once a month or so, and at the beginning of the month we had some like just bullet points to consider, or maybe, hey, we've been kind of reading this article, and then if you were interested, you could do the same, and then you would actually have very pointed questions and able to really engage that way. What do you think about that?
yeah, I think
Or does that just sound like homework?
a little bit, but if you then folks that were interested enough to comment on it, you could address certain comments that, of your choosing, and you could recap them on the next one. Hey, you know, we put out this blog or whatnot, and these people had questions on this, and this is our response, you know, like, and you can kind of open it up.
You're gonna have a lot of questions to answer.
I know, right?
Like I'm not the smart person.
That's like my homework.
Like that's
huh?
you.
Well, hey, but the good thing is that you guys provoked questions from me because of what you had to say. So that's good. That means you got my attention. There's interaction. Like, and now I'm curious, and now I'm like, should I litter? Should I not litter? I'm not real sure because I'm confused.
Well, maybe it's zero sum. If you throw something on the ground while you pick something up, right? You're just kind of like prepaying for future archaeologists to find your stuff. Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah.
You could just have fun with it. You could just have fun with it too. If you find like an arrowhead on the ground, put it in a Starbucks cup and then leave it there.
Yeah.
I know.
It'll super screw with future archaeologists. They'll be like, oh, this is when the big EMP pulse went, and they went back to medieval times, but they still had the cup.
They still had the cup.
They found a use for the cup.
That's right. The K cups will never die. Sir.
I think, Brian, you came up with something incredibly poignant, and that's the K cup layer. I think that so well describes our modern disposable decadence of the plastic era. I mean, to me, the K cup is the most wasteful possible thing. I'm going to do this perfect little survey in this little plastic thing, then it's going to be in landfill for 30,000 years or whatever. I think you've coined an incredible term to describe this era right now.
Well, and to add to that, so in my day job that I have to do still, I work at the Gigafactory, right? Not for Tesla, but in the Tesla Gigafactory. And what is Tesla's overall, what is the public image of Tesla? They're trying to, they have dual motivations, right? Save the planet and get the fuck off at the same time, right? Like Elon Musk is like, SpaceX for me, y'all will try to make this a little better for the rest of you guys, right? He's gone for sure. The rest of us, well, until I get famous, the rest of you, right, we're going to be stuck here on this planet, so we got to, do what we can or whatever. But I mean, honestly, the K-cup layer could be the cell phone layer. It could be the styrofoam layer. It could be the plastic flamingo layer. It's
yeah.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we have so much just crap, right, that we have no way of actually getting rid of. We can recycle it, but they still got to do something with it eventually.
Well, to your point, though, he said, like, I encourage you to, in a sense, leave trash because it tells history and it tells time frames. But what about those people that they can't get rid of their trash because it's a tube TV and they dump it somewhere?
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's already 20 years old. They dump it on a place that has, possible artifacts, and it just meshes everything up.
Right. Well, that's what I think is the most important thing about being an archaeologist. It's the digital and narrative recording of history, right? Because so we can recycle and throw that stuff away and dismantle it and do what we want with it. Back in the day, we weren't able to. I can't stop now. I know, right? Yeah. So we weren't able to do stuff like that. I mean, I just recorded an entire episode where we talked about an 8-minute video that was recorded, or it's probably longer than that, but it was cut down to 8 minutes of New York in 1911. And just looking at that and thinking, that's really great. We've got we can see clothing, we can see building and architectural styles, we can see all kinds of different things, behavior patterns, we can see all kinds of stuff in this video. But you go back farther than that, we can't see any of that, because there's no video, there's no photographs, there's paintings, which are biased and subjective. So, you can't trust a painting, but there's nothing that you can definitively say, this is how things were. When I look at that New York video from 1911, I can say, yes, those people are just going about their lives. This was not a documentary. This was not scripted. There was no dialogue, no anything. They were just had a camera on a street filming New York City. And that was amazing to me, just to see that slice of life. But for so many things we just can't see that. And so archaeologists have an ability to record those things. We may not be able to accurately interpret, but at least we can record. And that's what I try to tell people that work for me and people that I work with. I'm like, listen, don't worry about whose this is. Don't worry about what time this dates to. Describe it as much as you possibly can. Describe it in as many ways as you possibly can. Take 100 photographs. We're not using film anymore. We're using digital. So if you got to take 75 photographs of this one thing, because we're going to leave it there, we're never going to come back. Nobody's ever going to come back. It's probably going to be bulldozers or looters that are going to come back and take it, or some kid. So if we describe it, then we've just preserved that little bit of history. And I don't even know where I'm going with this anymore. But, the point with this whole thing is we've got trash that we're recording, sure, and people are cleaning up trash, and that's fine. I think we pretty well have the whole trash industry. Like, we don't have people's micro stories, like, your individual childhood and adulthood and what you did on this ranch. We can answer that for some people with certain things, but we have the broad brushstrokes of history, and I think that's good. So as long as we make sure we record that stuff and record this stuff now. One of the things my co-host and I came up with at the end of that New York discussion just the other day was take lots of pictures. You don't have to put them on Facebook. Just take them, make sure they're somewhere, but take pictures of mundane things. Like, one of my main examples was this guy over here. Every time it's summertime, back when he had a lawn that he could actually mow, and the HOA didn't prevent him from doing it.
Dude, this is calling me the mundane thing.
Yeah, you're the mundane thing.
Right?
Yeah,
I'm the okay.
Do you know how many pictures? If you want to see pictures of different mowing patterns, go follow him on Instagram.
I'm a new dad. Okay, there's a reason I'm outside fucking mowing.
I know, right? But the point is, take pictures of mundane things. We have plenty of pictures of your food, so we're good. But but and festivals and parties, people take pictures of that. I noticed nobody took pictures of this, so screw every one of you. But anyway, we don't have pictures of enough mundane things in our lives that we can think. Nobody cares about it now. Think about that. But if you see a picture of a living room from 150 years ago, you're like, man, this is fascinating. We go to museums. We've been to Key West and seen the, what's his name? The Hemingway house. They've preserved his house in the way that, he used it when he was writing and things like that. And that's just amazing to see that configuration. You're thinking, shit, nobody cares about what my house looks like, but they do actually. In 50 to 100 years, when they're all living in space pods and wearing unitards and, on Mars with Elon Musk, a bust of him in every room, they're going to wonder what it looked like on Earth in 2018. And all we're going to have is, people getting high and festivals and food and K-Cups.
Now I'm like, I need to go clean my house.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, she's really good at it.
Yeah.
But the other takeaway is, the other thing is, I think what Chris is asking is for every one of you, when we're done with this, to go through all of your photos and send them to chris.webster at his email address, because he truly cares about the mundane aspects of your life. And he is an archaeologist, so this makes sense.
That's true.
So I've got like terabytes of stupid pictures.
I know. I know. Well, I'm going to bring you up again, because let's talk about that. When you were a child, and let's not even talk about what year that was, but when you were a child, photography was even, up until, honestly, digital photography was kind of a precious thing. People would throw away film photography even back in, when I was a kid, but, you crafted the pictures you were going to take. You were like, I've only got 24 exposures here. I'm only going to do so much. Yeah.
And the other thing is, you have to realize when we were the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
and when marijuana was really kind of the bad thing.
Yeah.
And a good thing. This is what I think. So I'm going to segue just for a second. I was joking with Chris that I've had 2 larger performances where the average age of all the spectators was about 70. And I'm out there telling weed jokes and this and killing. And I was trying to figure out why. And I'm like, duh, they created the whole movement. Why was they even nervous? You're not going to remember. Right. That's what I'm saying. It's all new material to you.
Nice.
So.
Just don't care anymore.
Yeah. Right?
But going back to the photography, yes, you only have so many things, and so my brother was a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And I could remember him getting down on the ground to take a certain picture. All the pictures that we have, his closet is full of boxes of pictures. And I don't know
What kind of pictures?
where they're gonna go.
Yeah. Well, how many pictures do you have of like your family or siblings or something like that from when you were a child? But how many wouldn't you kill for a picture of what your room looked like when you were like 8? You know what I mean? With nothing in it?
Well,
Just to see.
I had a room with 2 sisters.
Even then, just to know, to look back
Way to
on
go,
that.
Chris.
I know.
Bringing up
I know.
PTSD
Trauma.
type stuff.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Well, somebody's going to want to see. An archaeologist is wanting to see that.
You're right,
Yeah.
that just those pictures of like the backyard, the garage, and what my dad was doing, and we do have pictures of him with his head always in a hood of a car, in the driveway.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like when you say that, and I'm like, oh, I gotta go clean my house. I gotta clean the dog poop out of my yard. Like I do because they all pick my house, and they're like, these people sucked. Like they were gross. So yeah, I gotta start shaping up on that one.
And that's what I want to see. Like, if we took pictures, if somebody said they're going to take pictures of our house, she would spend 8 hours cleaning. If we think someone's going to walk through that front door, she'll spend 8 hours cleaning the house. But I want pictures of what it looks like right now. You're all invited, by the way. No, oh, she cleaned it. Just on the mere thought of someone coming over, the house was cleaned. So, but I want pictures of, socks on the floor and the bed not made and different things because.
Pictures of my parents in a chest, and it's in a album with black paper.
Mm-hmm.
The little corner
Yeah.
and it's my mother as a baby.
Nice.
And then my cousin lives on the homestead that my great grandfather got,
Right.
and they found glass pictures. Was it?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of the home. So I do have a lot of family history, and we do have those pictures of just things that were there.
Right. Well, that's good. And I feel like throughout time, this is purely anecdotal. I've never done any study on this, but just my own perception of photography. Every time there's been a massive fundamental shift in photographic technology, you end up with mundane photographs because people are just kind of trying it out. They're like, oh, wow, this is neat. I'm just going to snap pictures of things. And they're not, they're not really concerned with, okay, well, now let's get the whole family together and do a portrait. Let's do this thing here. Let's do the wedding photography. Let's do whatever. And every time there's that huge shift through time, until we got to the digital age, now we'll just take pictures of practically anything. But we still aren't really focusing on mundane stuff. We're focusing on our Facebook and our Instagram feed where we want it to look like we live exciting lives so we can make our friends jealous. So,
It's great when you're talking about doing all this digital stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff's going to degrade a lot faster or lose all the technology that's going to play it back.
Right.
A lot quicker than tintypes and daguerreotypes are.
Oh, yeah.
So having all those pictures is a lot more ephemeral than those older pictures you're talking about.
Right.
To do that, there's not enough effort being made in preservation.
Well, that's
Technology or technology transfer.
right. That's actually a huge problem in archaeology. And I was part of a forum on virtual and digital ethics at the last big archaeology conference I was at in April. And that was one of the big things that was discussed. There were a few museum professionals there, and they're like, before digital, we'd get a report and we'd get a curated selection of photographs from the site records and the art of, and the report and stuff like that. But now they're given 5,000 photographs for a single project, and they're all digital, and there's no organization to them whatsoever. And they're just given all this stuff, and they don't even know how to do it. And not only that, but they're like, we have reports that we can read that are in our records from 1950, but we also have digital files from the mid 80s and the 90s that we can't read anymore because we didn't preserve a way to do that. Yeah, it's either on something that degraded or it's in a file format that can no longer be read. So you're right. We're also in that era that transitional era where we want to do all these things, but we're really not sure how to keep it. And one of the ways that I've discussed with these museum people and on some of my podcasts about how to do this is you need to have a strong digital preservation plan, just like you have a strong physical preservation plan. It's like I was talking to this woman that runs a museum in Arizona, and she's like, I'm like, do you guys commonly change out the air filters in your curation facility, with all your artifacts? Do you commonly dust off the boxes? Do you sweep the floors? Do you do all these things? She's like, well, yeah, of course we do all that. We have like contracts with people and they do these things because we have to keep the filters going. We have to keep all that stuff. I was like, okay, well, every 4 or 5 years, you should replace your hard drives. Every 4 or 5 years, you should go through your file formats. You should have a list of file formats. Make sure they're still readable. You should always maintain a computer brand new off the shelf in a box, because you can get one for $300 that can read that file format. It has never been turned on, but the minute you turn it on, even 50 years later, it's a time capsule for that time period and can run all those file types. And I was like, that just has to be part of your preservation plan. And that's the kind of stuff we got to think about. But we're not right now.
If it's old, though, you've surpassed that technology, so someone, some way can find a way to extract that. Do you know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you with
sometimes
updating all of your things, but eventually, like a physical picture, you can find a way to scan, and then you put it on a hard drive, and then that you can find a way to change into a PDF, and then change into,
right.
It just keeps changing with the evolution of technology.
Well, the problem with data is you got to stay on top of it, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, why can't you go backwards?
Well, the reason is there's a lot of data files that we simply can't go backwards on, because let's say
Floppy disk, for example.
well, that's a physical medium, though. So that's something that does degrade over time, and we know that. But let's say you have the file that was put on that floppy disk.
Right.
Let's say you were able to get that file off of there, and that file was WordPerfect 1.2. Okay, that's what that thing was done in. There's nothing that can open that today. I mean, it's a proprietary file format for a company that went out of business.
Yeah.
So when these companies go out of business and they have proprietary, I record all my podcasts with Adobe Audition. It's an SESX file. When Adobe Audition goes out of business, and they probably will in the future, that SESX file is gone.
Well, okay, the worst, not the best quality, but like, you take that, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you have a really old computer, floppy disk, print that somehow,
Sure.
okay?
Yeah.
Get to that point, and then scan that into a new file, and it can perhaps be,
Right. You're thinking along the right lines. You need to be just conscious of your media, your file types, your things, and then constantly be looking at them.
the time too long, then
Yeah.
there's no way.
Well, and that's the problem.
If you keep updating it, like you said, it's
Yeah.
great. But if you don't keep updating it, there's no way that media from 20 years
Right.
ago can read what you have today.
The best thing to do for anybody that wants to save anything, especially if you're working with just like data, is to now, for archival purposes, save things in federal ISO standard formats. Like PDF has become an ISO standard format. It's not going to go away anytime soon. We know PDFs are going to be around for a while. But also pure text data files, like a CSV file or something like that. Those are human readable text files where they're not encoded by somebody's proprietary file format. So I can just open this like a text file, a TXT file. I can just open that and I can actually read it. So there's no proprietary information there. I can read that. But a doc file, a Word doc file, completely not preservable, because Microsoft could decide to change that next year and make them something else. And then in 10 years, they're going to stop supporting these ones from 2018, and all of a sudden, they're not readable anymore because they are proprietary file formats. So,
Then they give you job security in a way.
well, there you go. There you go.
If everything was
Yeah.
critical, then you wouldn't really.
I know.
There's gonna have to be like data archaeologists in the future.
There are data archaeologists.
Like only to dig out old data. Basically.
There's people doing that now, basically. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's basically what it's turned into, is that
yeah.
everything, because we didn't appreciate history and preserve it like we would have, the people back in the day did their best, for example, like writing on rocks and walls and moving, but you don't know what's going to happen to damage that information, and you don't know where that information's going to go, and then, so now we're all about preserving it, but the thing is, you can preserve it only as much as it's given to you. Like you're talking about, the pictures and stuff. Okay, well, a picture of somebody's random family is not going to mean something to you, but I thought it was very interesting that you said, okay, a value, what they're used to.
Yeah, I can probably date that picture. Yeah.
Just a thought. Do you think that we're in a different place than our ancestors in terms of right now we're talking about having a discussion about preserving these things that we're creating now, right? Did the Indians consider, I'm going to preserve this Clovis point, I'm going to preserve this? Did our ancestors who inherited northern Nevada, did they think about that kerosene can they were throwing out, or that that old tea kettle they made into a lantern or something? Were they concerned about that? No, they weren't. This is just trash to them, right? So are we at a kind of evolving, I guess, our considerations about what we see as trash and what we see as having value maybe to something in the future?
No. What have you thrown away today? What have you thrown in the trash today?
Some saran wrap, plastic bags, some
Right.
tambourines.
So in 150 years, when those cucumbers are extinct because they had some sort of huge disease like bananas did or something, and they're gone now, or saran wrap is plastic, we're certainly going to do away with plastic at some point in our lives. We're going to figure something else out. It's going to degrade. There's a lot we can tell from what you've just thrown away today casually because you didn't place any significance on it. Nobody places significance on the kerosene can they threw away 100 years ago, but we do now because we can tell a lot about that kerosene can from the way it was constructed, what's written on it, whether there's a maker's mark, the different things. There's different, like bottles, for example. We love bottles because you can date bottles to almost the month that they were produced. Not necessarily when they were used, because bottles were reused for a long period of time. But we know generally when the bottle, at least the year, or maybe a small range of years when the bottle was made, because of the manufacturing techniques and even some laws. Like it was, what was it, 1935 or something, when the federal prohibit on the shoulder of a bottle was put on there. It was prohibited to reuse the bottle. Federal law prohibits. We know when that law was enacted. So we know when that shows up on bottles that it can't date to before that law because nobody would put that on if they didn't have to. So you can look at other stuff like that. My point is, nobody thinks the stuff they have right now is significant. We're throwing these cups away, but the design of this cup, the shape, there's two different shapes right here. This might be significant in this company, which is printed right on the bottom. And a recycle symbol is printed on the bottom. So I know that this cup dates to post when recycling symbols had to be my mandatory law printed on the bottom of these plastic things. I know the construction of the plastic. I know there's a 9 or a 6. Oh, that's a 9 ounce, right? And then there's an E with a circle. I have no idea what that means, but somebody will look at that later and say, oh, that was XYZ company out of China that was producing these things, and they did it from this year to this year, and now I can date that. Seemingly insignificant, and you're going to throw yours in the trash. That bottle's got a ton of information on it. You're going to throw that in the trash too because you don't think it's significant, but it's significant to every single archaeologist in 50 years. Yeah, so we look at things 50 years back. So 1968 is now eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places.
Sign up. So, I wonder if there's also something to be said with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Indians were busy like hunting and gathering. They had time to worry about, like, we have time. We're comfortable. We've reached a level where thinking about this stuff is enjoyable and we have the free time to do it.
Yeah.
I made the comment in conversations before that how nice it is we live in a time where we can complain about not being treated fairly or the way we like as compared to, say, 50, 60 years ago or longer, where there wasn't air conditioning or deodorant. And as we get more comfort, we can complain about so much more stuff. But I don't think the Indians and all those folks really had time to worry about, we're going to preserve this they're like, we got to go hunt or we're going to die. So I wonder if there's that. We're at a state of comfort and in America, maybe not for long, but at the moment we're in a state of comfort where we can think about these things and care. But in the past, they may not have just had the time to even worry about that. When you're in true hunter-gatherer mode.
I think there were societies, though, that probably did in the past, like the Romans.
Sure, once you've
those eras.
There's been some through time, but then they choose the history that they want to preserve, and they destroy the ones they don't. They write their own history books.
And they certainly had the comfort as well.
Building and it becomes a mosque.
Sure, right. Tear down the statues of Stalin like it never happened, right? So, but the thing is with Native Americans, and this isn't across the board, obviously, they had different ideas, but ethnographic evidence, which just simply means people in the 17 and 1800s actually talking to Native Americans, writing this stuff down, so actual histories that we have. A lot of Native American groups placed zero significance on the stuff that they were producing at the time, but if they came upon something that was not something that they did, like I mentioned earlier, that's seen as ancestral and sacred, and they wouldn't touch it. Now, that's the ethnographic evidence, but the archaeological evidence, that's a nice, pretty picture that they paint, but the archaeological evidence is projectile points have changed, have been reused through time. So we'll see one with a base on it that's like this wide, and we know that ones with this type of shape of base were used on arrows or spears or what have you, but it's actually only this tall when most of the ones we find are this tall, right? So it's been reworked. It was either broken or something, and it's been reworked down into this other shape because the base tells us it used to be this shape, but they're not usually this tall, so it looks like something else. So either the original person who used it or made it, or the original tribe, modified it later on, which I find is highly unlikely, or more likely the case, they were fucking hungry, and they're walking along the desert, and you find one that's, hey, this is already ready to go. This is great. I don't have to go to a quarry. I don't have to go anywhere. I'll tell you what, if it's between the ancestors and my next meal, which is grazing across the pasture over there, I'm probably going to pick this up, haft it to a shaft, and shoot the thing. So
Or you break it off and
you modify
You
it.
do what you got to do in the moment.
You do what you got to do. Yeah.
What are they going to do with their K-cups? That's the question.
I know. Who knows? I think they're just going to be little like solo cups for future. We're all going to get smaller because competition for resources. So we're going to have to be small, like island dwarfism kind of thing. And then K cups will be our drinks of the future. Yeah.
Or it'd be nice if we were able to just preserve the knowledge and people in the future, like they were just dumb.
I know.
Like
right?
way back then, they were just stupid, and that's why they did this.
That's right.
Do you think that we record more information now than, well, obviously we do, but do you think that's something that people can find later on, like 3,000 years from now versus, before we can find information, but we're just understanding it and kind of making our own interpretation
Right.
of it?
If
That's going to be the same thing, or do you think we've left enough of an imprint that they could?
Well, here's the
define what we're doing?
here's the problem with interpreting now, 3,000 years from now.
Right.
I can interpret 3,000 years ago because it's all stone, right? Like it's all hard-coded features in the landscape that I can tell. I am guessing. You're right. Like we've been guessing about Stonehenge for 2,000 years. Like we still don't really know what Stonehenge was used for. I mean, we know it was roughly astronomical, but there's other things to go along with that, right? And every month there's a new article about Stonehenge and what the hell's going on there, because it really is just a collection of stones, and we're trying to figure it out. The pyramids, another classic example. We have lots of theories for how they were probably built, but we don't actually know. We think we know that this would have worked and this would have worked, but the Egyptians, while they wrote everything else down, they didn't write down a blueprint for how to make a pyramid, which is really frustrating. So, but the thing is, in three...
Happening right now. We're writing down everything and we're recording everything, but there's
Right.
one thing that we won't think about until it's brought up.
But there's a bigger problem.
Years later.
There's a bigger problem than that. In 2,000, 3,000 years, when either if we're still here, but more likely if we're gone, then an alien civilization or our ancestors come down and try to look at this stuff because there was some reason why there was a gap. It's going to be nearly impossible because they're going to look at our computers and our technology and all the things that we have and the ways that we have recorded the things. We haven't recorded them in stone. There's a Far Side comic or something where it's just the pillars from like an elevated interstate, and they're like, oh, it must be some ceremonial, whatever the hell, because that's the artifacts. The archaeologist's like default is ceremonial. Like I don't really know ceremonial. Right? Yeah. So if you don't know, that's why a lot of the history books for archaeology got everything wrong, and people are starting to change that. They're like, oh, this was some ceremonial object, because they don't understand what it is. ... ceremonial. So, Yeah. Anyway, I think we gotta close this down. The questions have been fantastic. Brian's gonna do a short set here, but this has been great. Maybe we've learned that this needs to be like an hour and a half long show or something like that, or we just keep it rolling.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, thought people were gonna get bored at about 15.
I thought we were gonna get bored at about 15.
Like, why are we? You know what? Let's just drink.
Yeah. So
I don't know. Stand up, sit down comedy seems weird right now.
you can. I'm gonna get up. So you got this.
You don't have to get up.
All right. Well, I need more wine. So.
Yeah. I would have to switch to beer, right? My comedy is not wine quality comedy. It is beer quality.
You want to take a minute while people can get their
you
drinks
guys want to
refreshed?
take a break and like walk around?
Yeah.
and
Then
use
Brian's
the
gonna close us out.
restroom?
So.
The Archaeology Podcast Network has partnered with TeePublic to bring you some awesome gear that looks good, promotes archaeology, and puts a few pennies in our pockets so you can get free podcasts. Check out our designs at arcpodnet.com/shop. That's arcpodnet.com/shop.
Just be part of it. It's a different dynamic for me because, one, I'm still very, very new at this. But two, typically you don't spend an hour and a half getting to know the comic or listening to them talk before they get up and start, now look at me differently. And sitting down and with other people.
So let me introduce him just a little bit more, then you can continue. Because I don't think we exactly expressed what this portion of the show was going to be. We wanted to have, the whole science portion of the show is supposed to be entertaining and educational at the same time. But Brian is a stand-up comic here in Reno. He's done some stuff, and he's done some paid gigs, and he's trying to really get this going. So this has nothing to do with science, and this is Brian's stand-up show. I just want to say that.
Maybe psychology.
Maybe psychology.
Maybe you need to look at yourself a little.
That's right.
Where have I performed? You've maybe seen me in my shower. I do a lot of performing there. I did a lot of open mics at 3rd Street Bar and like Beck's Brew House. There's actually quite a few places to do open mics here. I did a show in Carson City in Fandango. Last month I did a show, my largest one actually, in the fabulous Fallon Elks Lodge, which I can only hope that if I make it to like club comedy that I can tell that coming up story along with this. So, I'm in the Elks Lodge in Fallon, and no joke, it was like 120 people because what else is there to do in Fallon, right? So what, comedians? So this is not part of my set, but I'll just share this with you because I thought it was funny. So I roll up, and I'm nobody, right? I'm not famous. I'm just like doing this. And the way that the Elks Lodge brought this up to the city, literally, or the village of Fallon, and we got the Chamber of Commerce, like they were advertising and everything, and no joke, the whole town thought some super famous person was going to show up. You know what I mean? So so I drive up in my Pathfinder, right? Just a regular old car, and I get out, and there's a gentleman there. He's clearly an Elks Lodge member. There was no way he wasn't. And he goes, "Hey, are you one of the comedians?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I don't recognize you at all. Like, I've never seen you." And I was like, "Yeah, you probably wouldn't have. Probably not, no." And they're like, "Well, who's the special guest? Who's the famous comedian?" Because basically, the reason this whole thing got brought up was there was supposed to be 3 people, a host, myself, and then the headliner. And at the last minute, the headliner, who was designing the whole thing, brought in another comedian. And he's actually been a Pioneer Underground. And he's like he's a Donald Trump impersonator, which is perfect for Fallon, right? So they brought him on, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna have a super special guest. We're not gonna tell you." So no shit. For like until the show started, people were like, "Is it Jimmy Fallon? Is Jimmy Fallon coming? We've been trying to get Jimmy Fallon to come out here." And I'm like, "You never know." Right? Totally not. It's just me, or Donald Trump there. But honestly, I think they were super stoked to see fake Donald Trump there. So good. Good for them. We played to the audience for sure. So yeah, there's a bit of a difference between 120 people and then our group here, but it's also very neat. It's like you're very close, and I feel like at this point we've built a tiny relationship. So if I did say something horrible, you'd be like, that's just Brian, right? So, now that I've been up here for a while and you've been staring at us creepily, some of you may or may not recognize me. I was actually in a couple of movies when I was a child in the early 80s, mid 80s. What's that? Name them. Well, here's the thing though. I really wouldn't be offended if you didn't know, because it really didn't have like a huge release. It was mostly just like my uncle and a couple of his buddies. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of an underground circuit. There was a few other suburban basements that had a copy, but that was pretty much it. So, yeah. It was weird, though, because, like, once a week, they would all want to come over and watch those movies. And I'm like, you were in them. Like, what? Could we just make a new one at least? This is getting pretty basic. Speaking of porn. Did you realize, right, we've been talking about preserving data. Okay, do you realize that someday, sir, every bit of data relating to every porn search, every porn video you have ever watched is going to be available to be used against you as blackmail, right? That's going to be easily collectible data. That's scary, right? Because let me tell you, right now, one, I can't pay for the blackmail. So whatever's out there is just coming out, and you're all going to see it. And if it got released right now, right, it would just be like white on white, guy on guy. Wait, what? No, never mind, not that. Next joke. But one thing it did get me to think about was, like, I probably should start watching more interracial porn, right? Like, I really want to be on the right side of search history when this all comes out. I'm going to be like, that guy was racist. It's just white on white all the time. But where do you go from porn? I have a daughter. Is that a creepy segue? My wife and I actually adopted a newborn, like literally right out of the oven. It was like pop, and we had her, and she's been ours ever since. And do you have children? Do you have children? You have children? Okay, I have a 2.5-year-old, and she's creating a lot of material for me. So I'm starting a new set. It's called Toddlers Are Assholes. Okay. And that's as far as I've gotten with the bit. I know there's a gold mine there. But I'm going to tell you why, right? Because I don't know how you describe this behavior and not call it being an asshole. So I work a lot of hours. And I'll come home, and sometimes my wife will have the baby up late just so that I can see her before she goes to sleep. And I'll come in, and I'll get down on my knees, and I'll be like, Emma, come here. And she'll look at me, she'll be like, ah, and she'll throw her arms out and run right towards me. And right at the last second, just like curve me, and be like, arr, and then go hug the dog. Right? Totally stoked for the dog. I'm gone all day. The dog gets the love. That's kind of assholey behavior. I'm sorry. How else do you describe that? But she's not always an asshole. Sometimes she's super cute. One of her favorite things, she's 2.5, so one of her favorite things to do now is to point out when she sees a baby. Right? So if we're looking at a book and there'll be like a little dinosaur and a bigger dinosaur, and she'll point to the little one and be like, Daddy, look, a baby. I'm like, yes, of course, that's right. That's a baby dinosaur. Good job. Super cute. Until you're in a grocery store and a midget walks by with his regular sized buddy. Mm-hmm. Daddy, look, a baby. Oh. Right? I don't like, she's only 2.5. I don't want to fuck her up already. You know, how do I get through? I don't know how to get through this. So I'm like, what do I? Look, sweetie, yeah, that's a baby. Man, that's... Kids, toddlers are working on schemas, okay? You can't get too complicated with that stuff. Plus, I mean, honestly, fuck's he gonna do about it? What's he gonna do? He's gonna run over and beat up my daughter? There's one thing that you need to learn about Brian, is that I am all about equality. Okay, so if anyone tried to put their hands on my daughter, well, especially a midget who I'm pretty sure I could beat up, try to touch her, look, that little dude's getting corner kicked into the frozen food aisle. He's going to end up next to those tiny, tiny pizzas. Okay, I'm not putting up with that. I treat everyone fairly. Okay. I'm 41, and now people feel the need to come up to me and tell me that I need to like start activities and move and do stuff. So I listen, I took up dog fighting. Figured that was a pretty good way. And I know, animal cruelty, right? Look, once you go toe-to-toe with a 90-pound pit bull that hasn't eaten for a week, you'll forget about all that shit really quickly. Okay? It's dangerous stuff. Next week, I'm fighting a Rottweiler named Columbine in Sun Valley. A little nervous about that one. It's going to be rough. Dogs. Do you have dogs? You have a dog. Who has dogs? All right. You ever hear people, they're always talking about, they go to the pound and they're, I rescued a dog. Right? Oh, I rescued him. No, you didn't. You went to the used dog store and you got a used dog. Okay, let's just be real honest about that. And if you had the money, you would have got an inbred dog like me. Okay. So, I don't know really where to go after inbred dogs.
There's not too many places you can go.
No. You know what? I'm going to wrap up with this because it's probably the worst thing I've thought of so far. Drink a beer. Could you imagine if AT&T suddenly got into the abortion business? They'd have to have a commercial, right? This is what I think it would sound like. Hey, America. Introducing AT&T's new family plan, B. With AT&T's new family plan B, AT&T customers are in control because with AT&T's family plan B, you have a choice. Any member of AT&T's family plan B can cancel any newly added member of their family for the first 16 to 22 weeks, depending on what state you live in. No questions asked. Just come on into one of our many customer care centers, pay a small early termination fee, and your life's back on track. Welcome home, America. Welcome home to AT&T. Seriously, though, I really want to thank everyone for coming out to our first show. I had a good time, so I guess it doesn't really matter if you did, but I hope you did. Like I said, this was a little bit different for stand-up comedy. But either way, I hope that you enjoyed the format, and I really think that we got some good comments about things that we might be able to do differently or better. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Appreciate you coming out.
All right. Great.
Okay, well, as I said, that was a little bit different. So hopefully you weren't too offended. Hopefully you learned something, and hopefully it was enjoyable. If you happen to be in Reno, come by and check out one of our shows. Just keep an eye on the APN Facebook page or arcpodnet.com for more information on upcoming shows. We'd love to take this on the road at some point, but obviously that's not going to happen anytime soon. So, hey, if somebody want to put together a fundraiser and bring us to your town to do a live science and comedy show, then we'll be more than happy to do that. But until then, we're going to have to keep it local and keep it to Reno. So thanks a lot. Thanks again for listening, and we'll be back with another regular episode of The Archaeology Show next time.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.